So the very first thing that you'll see here with this video is the street preacher's approach. You can't see, or we'll put it right on the screen. You can't see, but behind the street preacher, there's actually a whole entourage of people who have come there to support him. Now, I've seen many videos with this particular preacher, and I know that the people who go with him, their intent is not to bring any type of conflict in. You can tell that their efforts are to make peace with the people that are around them. But he's got quite an entourage, and it's probably because this guy has physically been attacked. He has had stuff thrown on him. You know, he has been spit at. You know, people have tried to do harm to his physical body. He's been arrested and everything you can think of. But that's just to give you an idea of the setting. And it does in itself lend itself to the fact that our approach, like, is the persecution that we suffer as preachers always required by God? I mean, we could easily justify biblically and say that the apostles were thrown into prison and Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. But is the persecution that we're suffering a result of the message that we have, or because our approach is not the best approach? So let's get into this first clip.
I hear you, I see you. I understand, I was there too, lining up. I don't know how old you guys are, 18, 19, 20 years old, maybe 21. It looks fun. Everybody's getting high, drunk tonight, partying tonight. It's Friday night and the weekend's here. I get it. How many of you are drunk yet?
So I do like the fact that right from the beginning that he acknowledges that he has also been where they are. So he's not coming out and just saying, I'm better than you. He's coming out and saying, I used to do the same thing. And basically what he's saying is, you know, I'm about to bring something to you, but I understand what you're all doing here. All right. So I like the fact that he brings empathy ahead of the message that he's about to bring, but there will be a shift.
None of y'all are drunk. How many of you are high? Okay, I get it. You're going in to get drunk, right? You're going in to get high. I see it. Everybody's walking down trying to get high tonight. You know what? I'm here to tell you something. I believe with all my heart that you're lining up because you think that this is where fun is going to be tonight.
I also like the fact that he's addressing something that, you know, that I firmly agree with, which is the fact that these young people, he addresses their age and says, look, I don't know if you're 18, 19, or 20 years old, and here you are lining up at this place where you think there's going to be fun. And I also agree with the fact that despite the interruption that this causes, that what he's attempting to do is interrupt something that can bring harm to these young people. And so they're looking for fun, but many of them don't realize that their fun could quickly be turned to something else that they don't like. So I really agree with that part of his approach.
You believe love is going to find you tonight. You think that your boyfriend is going to propose or maybe bring you to your house tonight. You're going to get so blitzed and high and drunk that you're going to enjoy the bedroom tonight. I understand. I was there. It's time for you to think about what the repercussions are going to look like in that moment. Because every action has a consequence. Every decision is going to bring about a result.
Okay, so every action has a consequence. And I get that aspect to his message. And what I don't like is the fact that it gets introduced so early in his address. Maybe he's projecting other experiences over onto this one. How does he know whether or not these young people are going to be open to his message or not? And before there's even an opportunity for them to respond or not, he starts saying every action has a consequence. And that's one of the main things that I do want to address throughout this entire review is it's not what the person's doing. I agree with what the person's doing. It's the underlying anchor behind what the person's doing. In this case, it's all about consequence. he hasn't even been speaking for 2 minutes yet, and he's already saying every action has a reaction, and he's talking about consequence. And so his message is fueled by consequence, and it's not being fueled by love, even though there's many good things that can come out of what he's doing.
Some of you are here and you have Christian family members. Some of you have no religion. Some of you are swearing at the preacher. Some of you think it's a joke. You're going to school. You're going to get a degree. You're going to become somebody. Maybe make some money. Maybe that's what your whole purpose is about.
I like the fact that he addresses the young people in the audience who might have Christian families, because I know as a person who grew up in the Christian families that we have been taught right from wrong. We know the difference between what we're supposed to be doing and what other people are doing. And so essentially what he's doing is he's trying to decipher, who's in this line. What he's admitting through his preaching is that there are people in this line who have had Christian teaching, and yet they're doing something that doesn't align with their Christian life. And I don't know about, other folks, but I do remember what it was like to be in a club and to kind of have an outer body experience where you're out of your body and you're looking back at yourself and you're wondering, why am I here? Or you're in an environment and you realize that even though God loves the other people in the room, you're completely out of place based on what God did for you in your life. And so I do think it's good that he kind of calls that to attention in these young people, and he gives the ones who are online an opportunity to reflect as to whether they're standing in the right place or not.
But then you find out sooner or later, as you go through the motions of life, that it doesn't bring about what you were looking for. You were looking for love and you didn't find it in the club. Opening your legs to your boyfriend, then you find yourself with human papilloma virus.
All right, so this is where we start to steer south, and it's where he starts to use these really direct derogatory sexual statements towards these young people. And in this case, he says, when you start to open your legs. And now, so for the rest of this video, whenever I hear a sexual reference, I'm going to pause the video and I'm just going to say, note, sexual reference. All right, because they keep coming up over and over again. And now that word I used was hinder, where a good thing, where maybe that young person is starting to listen, and now he's going to use where his flesh starts to get involved. And now he's going to use these sexual references to kind of to create some sense of urgency here. But it's the approach that starts to become a nuisance.
You find yourself with some STI and you realize, man, it wasn't worth it. A child out of wedlock. You end up aborting a child, all because you couldn't wait for the right time, the right season. The Bible says the wages of sin is death.
Okay, so let's pause again, because I said that the fuel behind this message was, for every action, there's a reaction, and for every action, there's a consequence. And so now he's starting to use that, here's that judgmental tone. And not that judgment is bad, by the way, but this is that condemning tone, I should say, where the wages of sin is death. That's one of the favorite lines of a person who has a hell-focused ministry, is the ministry, it doesn't revolve around love. It includes useful things, but it always revolves around this idea of consequence and sin and death. Now, within 5 minutes of meeting someone, I just don't see that as effective. For a person who works in nutrition, if I were to say to somebody, the wages of eating the wrong food is death, there might be a reality in that, especially for a person who is already having certain health risks. But to use that as the first introduction within a 2 to 5 minute time frame would be a really, if I said it wasn't professional and caring, would be an understatement. And so if I would exercise that amount of caring in a job, in an earthly occupation, why would I not extend that same level of courtesy as a minister for a heavenly occupation?
The wages of sin is death. The result of decisions that don't make sense. The result of decisions that don't line up with what is right. ends up with something wrong coming your way, regardless of your age, regardless of how much you have money to cover up the lawyer fees. You can't hide forever. You can't hide behind the picket fence. You might say to yourself, I'm going to get away with my crimes. My parents did it. My parents' did it. But what you don't realize is that the more you sin, the more dull your conscience becomes. And the more dull your conscience becomes, the more lewd you end up acting out because you don't see where you're going.
Yeah, and I agree with what he's saying here too. I don't think the question in this case is whether or not what he's saying is true. I think the question is the audience that he's talking to prepared for the word based on the way he's delivering it? So basically what he's saying is that as you participate in sinful activities, that you no longer have a conscience to be able to tell what's right from wrong. And he's saying that it can't be covered up by like your white picket fence, your money, your prestige, or anything like that. And all that's true, but it really takes for God to open up somebody's eyes before they can even understand what sin is. It's like telling somebody to repent for their sin before they know what sin is like telling somebody to change something that they can't even see. And so the message is defiled only because the audience, like basically he's telling them they're in sin. And so sin, if he can see that, then sin is basically a condition of spiritual blindness. Let's just use that for an ambiguous definition, that a person who is in sin is a person who is spiritually blind. Even if they're a good person, if they can't understand the love of Jesus Christ, then in a sense, they're spiritually blind. Well, how can they repent for something that they can't see until Jesus comes, right? So the next question is, how does Jesus come? Well, what the Bible tells us is that one sows, one waters, but it's God who provides the increase. Now, what we find is that in the case for many preachers, that what they're doing is they're sowing, they're watering, and they're also trying to provide the increase all in one shot. And so what would have been a really important and good message becomes defiled, either because it's being told to a person who can't spiritually see yet, or because the way it's being delivered is something that doesn't agree with the way God's Spirit moves.
You see, when you keep blinding your eye because of sin, eventually you'll have no eye to see. You'll have no eyes to see. And when you have no eyes to see, you're going to fall in a ditch. Some of y'all don't even know why you're smoking the vape. You're smoking the vape for what? Some of you are smoking tobacco. You don't even know what you're doing. You're going to have worse lungs in the next 5 years. Your breath is going to smell. Your liver's not going to work. All because of a...
All right. And so this is something that we have to be careful with. So he's talking about the consequences of smoking and the impact that it can have on your body. Now, there's a reality to what he's saying, because we all know that there's very serious health risk, and there's a link between smoking and cancer, and that cancer is one of the leading causes of premature death. However, as a minister, so are we giving out, first of all, is he a health professional to go out and to give out health information to all the people that are standing on this line? Some of those children probably have more health training than this preacher. And the second thing is, do preachers does a preacher led by the Spirit of God give out consequence? Are they delivering consequence, or are they delivering God's Spirit? You know, we talk about, when it comes to speaking a word over somebody, we talk about things like witchcraft, which is when you speak something into existence over another person's life. It's when you do like pharmacy, like what the word witchcraft means is pharmacy or pharmakia. And so a witch doctor is basically somebody who uses ingredients to create a spell to accomplish some kind of outcome in somebody else's life. They're literally creating that outcome. And so a witch may try to create an outcome of love. They may try to wish harm on somebody who has done harm to them. And so they're using spiritual powers to create outcomes that they want based on their will or their understanding and not necessarily according to God's. So from where I sit, unless this minister is completely sure that these people are going to have problems with their lungs and all those things that he said, he should not be implying anything that these people will deal with unless the Lord himself spoke that to him. And I think that was not his intention, is not to do witchcraft. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that as ministers, we have to really apply the same level of care to our words that we speak against when it comes to things like witchcraft and speaking things into it. The power of life and death is in your tongue. So you have a choice when you go out to minister. Either you can speak life into somebody or you can speak consequence and judgment. Now, speaking life doesn't mean that you only tell things that people that they want to hear. And I do believe that there's a time when sometime you have to pull somebody's coat and admonish them. If they are walking off a cliff, you have to tell them, look, if you go down that cliff, if you go over that ledge, you're going to die. It reminds me of very much one time when there was a man that was going to jump off the bridge, and all the cars were passing this man. And I'll never forget the look that I seen in his eyes. And he was in a position where he wanted to end his life. This is a true story. And I walked up to the man and he was so afraid. I saw the fear and I thought that if I went too close to him that he would end his life. And so I knew I only had one more statement that I could make to him. And that statement would either save him or it would frighten him and he would go and end his life. And I said, listen, I said, if you go down there, there's death. But if you come back over here where I am, there's life. And that was a moment where I had to tell him one way is death and the other way is life. But that was because that particular individual was on the brink of death. I did not just call him out while he was walking down the street to get a beer and just say, hey, the beer is going to kill you and my Bible's going to save you. Even though the beer is in a sequence of things that leads to a life that includes death and hell, my initial effort is not to weight that against the reason you should come to the Lord. There's many other things that benefit a person besides escape from death that can attract a person to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Of a decision, you're following the trends. Some of you are dressed half naked, no bra anymore.
Sexual reference, number 2, nope.
And you're wondering why people like you. They don't like you because they love you. They like you because they want to have sex tonight. I guarantee a lot of these guys are sleeping with you and they didn't put a ring on your finger. They didn't even ask you to get married, did they?
All right, so what he's doing here is he's addressing the young people. I'm not sure why he feels like he has to make these really explicitly sexual comments to make the statements that he's making. And so what he talks to is the absence of values supported by a clubbing lifestyle. And I agree with the fact that young people who are just sleeping together are not necessarily in the path of people who will eventually marry one another. That there's a lot of promiscuity and sexual danger that can be presented for these folks at this point in their life. Marriage is not the first thing on the mind of a young person going to a club. And so now he is taking it upon himself to go to the club and to remind the people about how far their activities are away from those values of marriage.
They're just sleeping with you. Why? Because they don't love you. They lust you. They lust you. They want something from you. They want to use you for some agenda of their own. But they're not going to marry you. Listen, I'm talking to you as a person that's gone down those roads. If somebody respects you and loves you, he's going to want to do it right. But people don't want to do nothing right because they're doing everything wrong.
It's really interesting that he talks about respect and love. In the meanwhile, while his tone could easily be perceived as disrespect. So if he's trying to teach these young women an example of respect, and in the meanwhile he's referring to them as opening their legs, how's that any different from the guy who might be trying to open their legs? You know, if he were to lead by example, could that be a stronger witness than these really sharp, harsh words that are coming from this man? Here we have this really mature, articulate man who's come on the block with these young women. And I also noticed that he tends to address the young women more than anybody else on that line. I'm not sure what that's all about, but he keeps addressing the young women about their sexual promiscuity, the clothing that they're wearing, and he uses these very explicit sexually oriented comments to kind of harp on the difference between them and the gospel that he's preaching. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and you're going to start to see, so this preacher, the gift that he has, which is a really awesome thing, is the ability to draw up these conversations. And you can't see it here, but in the background, along with all the other ministers who are, or people who are supporting him, there's also young people starting to gather around and have these conversations in the background. And so you're going to see one of them, it's a young lady who's going to come and talk to him. And, you know, just listen to his rationale to her state of condition. And clearly this is a night when young people are drunk and when they're trying to appeal to that world, because that's what the night is all about. And he starts to, he kind of lowers his voice a little bit. But then there's like this condescending insult that starts to come out of him in a way that I don't think that ministers should ever really express towards people who are inquiring in any way.
There'll be no repercussions for my decisions. Now you might be wondering today, people of Maryland and Washington, D.C., you might be wondering, man, what's going on? What's going on with your politics? Some of you, how many of you are Democratic here? How many of you are Democratic?
You're all fucking assholes.
Yeah, are you Democratic? How many are you Republican? How many of you don't even care?
So now, so somebody just walked by and called him, and you may not have been able to hear it, but somebody just walked by and called him a derogatory term, and just kind of kept walking. Now, what he does from that point is he starts to fish, so to speak. So he's fishing for comments, and he's querying this line for information. I think before he was querying about whether or not people were Christian, whether or not they were Catholic. It's really remarkable. The gift that he's operating in is because he's simultaneously, you know, doing a qualitative research and ministry at the same time. It's a really powerful thing that he's doing. However, the thing that kind of gets me about this is that how he responds when he doesn't get the responses that he's looking for. First of all, nobody on that line has to say a thing to him. And what he's doing is asking questions. And then if people don't reply, then he immediately starts to hurl insults and insult people as if their lack of response means that they are not what he is inquiring about. You know, they're not obligated to respond, and that also creates danger for people. So this man always talks about his level of intelligence, and so based on that, you would never want to ask questions to somebody without knowing where they came from. You're in a public place and you're asking people how many have been sexually abused, how many have mental illnesses, what religion are you? There are very personal questions that are being asked. Any one of those questions could present danger for somebody based on a situation that they may have had. Somebody may have had a bad experience with a priest. Somebody could have had a bad experience in the bedroom with the opposite sex. And it would seem like that makes the reason for his preaching that much more important. And as much as I would prefer that a person would pick up on the urgency of coming over to Jesus, it still doesn't mean we reserve the right to just intrude with our random questions in places where people weren't expecting and then start to hurl insults when people don't respond the way we expect them to.
All right, man. So not only do you not believe in God, you're not politicians either. So that means that you guys are just college students that are clueless about reality. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you're doing.
Well, that's kind of true. A lot of college students don't know what they're doing and they don't know where they're going. So the last thing they need on top of that is a preacher, somebody who's supposed to be upright and who they might look up to remind them of that. That goes back to what I was saying about the witchcraft, where now he's speaking, he's accusing them. So the word devil means accuser of the brethren. And so now the preacher, without any feedback from these people, without any knowledge whatsoever, is accusing these people, and all because they won't give him the attention that he's looking for with the questions that he's posing.
Just going along with the crowd. No wonder this whole city was shut down during the pandemic. You know why? Because nobody wanted to question what's really going on.
All right. So he says, no wonder this city was shut down during the pandemic, because nobody wanted to question what was really going on. And he says nobody. So that's a generalization. And that's something else that we want to avoid in ministry. And so he has escalated this from the young people who will not respond to him to now he's going to the whole city. And he's saying, if I can't get the young people to respond, I'm just gonna cast out a gigantic spell over this whole city. And I'm going to project my view as to why this city has the outcomes that it does.
Nobody wanted to think deeper to what's going on. But you know what's going on? People are just acting like sheep. People don't, come here so that you don't block the thing. People just are going down the road like the Pied Piper blowing the pipe. And people aren't even paying attention to what they're doing.
What do you mean?
What I mean? Well, I mean that a lot of, you see all these people lining up. Number one, they're lining up in the night. Some of them half naked, so it's getting cold. But why are they dressing up half naked when it's cold?
Sexual reference number 3. Once again, he's referring to them as being half naked. And what I would say is that a hell-driven ministry always focuses on whatever a person doesn't do the way somebody else expects. Now, the Bible does tell us that women should adorn themselves appropriately and should not, and should always cover themselves. But that we can't use that scripture to go outside and now what he's elected himself as in this situation is the sin police. So he's going to go around on the streets and evaluate whether anybody isn't dressed appropriately, and based on those qualifications, he knows that he can underscore this whole line. So basically nobody there has a leg to stand on because nobody fits his criteria for right living. That's an easy topic to address. And so what you'll find with street preachers, a lot of times they'll address the way people dress. They'll address the way people dress. And they'll address smoking and drinking and cursing. Those are the outward and the most visual things that can be assessed in terms of what's going on with a person. Now, the Bible does say, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, which means that the outward things can be a reflection of what's happening on the inside of a person. But there was Apostle Paul who said that we no longer regard one another according to the flesh. In other words, we're not going around and just looking at people on the outside and then making inferences, especially ones that would potentially discourage somebody, or in the worst case scenario, one that would put somebody in hell, burn them up forever and ever, speak words contrary to the words that God spoke for us, and then now expect that to somehow change this person's life. And so what we're doing is the exact opposite thing. So what we're doing with other people is the exact opposite thing that Jesus did for us. So what Jesus did for us before he went is he prayed and he said that my prayer is that they may sit with me where I'm sitting. Now he did that for people who had not gone to the cross, who were not sinless in their natural bodies, and who had a lot of imperfections. But what Jesus did, what the Spirit of Jesus does, is it speaks for us it advocates for us based on how the Father sees us. That's why Paul said we no longer regard one another according to the flesh. But what the human man does is it regards a person according to the flesh. It goes outside, it looks at a person and says, oh, you got earrings, you've got a tattoo, you've got a cigarette in your hand, you've got a beer. So you're going to hell and I'm not, because I'm a preacher and I don't have a cigarette and a beer and earrings. And so it uses these really rather simplistic simplistic, basic things to project righteousness or unrighteousness over people.